How are you? Today's episode is going to be on Russia. It's going to be on Francis Parker Yockey, the popular kind of Spenglerian neo-fascist philosopher. Let's go into what he thought of Russians. And we'll just go by what he wrote about, and why I say I just keep on coming up with. I keep on seeing the people who are like self-proclaimed, the dissident Rightoid, Yockeyite, Strasserite, NazBol, Eurasianist, Eurasian Imperium, the Duganist. This sort of thing has been really popular for a while. With weirdos on the internet. Like I've heard this sort of stuff for a while, and this seems kind of a hot topic for a lot of people. A lot of people have weird ideas and have had weird ideas about Russia for a long time. And they've all been proven wrong now, but there's only so many people who are going to acknowledge that. And it's true, you know, there have been quite a few people who have, and even I've seen that, and a lot of the people who I've collabed with in the past and was kind of doing things, you know, a lot of these people, you know, slowly but surely have been coming over and have been to, you know, I mean coming around on realizing that all the Russia stuff is kind of dumb, and that Putin isn't presenting any kind of any kind of viable sort of solution for anyone, even just in the negative, even as like fighting Zionism or something. It's not productive at all and has no value at all. Like in reality, if you just get into your own you know, your own kind of gobbledygook, you're someone who just likes to smell your own farts or whatever. Yeah, you know, these people still just go at it because they have no real connection to reality anyway. So when facts come along, it doesn't faze them in the slightest. But just for the heck of it, I thought it'd be funny because you'll see people they'll have the profile pic of like Yockey or something. I'm not like a huge Yockey guy. I don't really subscribe to his philosophy or anything like that, and or Spengler either. You know, I don't. Yockey is kind of, if you're not familiar, he's basically a well, like I said, but a big thing associated with him is this idea that he kind of departed with the Cold War right wing, the far right, in the hatred of communism as like the number one enemy, and to him the biggest enemy was came from America, from Americanism, and that this was the real threat to Europe for reasons that he, you know, was fond of explaining. But you know, so people kind of misconstrue some of this. You could see kind of how this can happen, especially if you don't read books, which most people don't. And you'll find most people who even get really into stuff with, you they don't really read anything, is what I find. I find that people aren't really, they don't really read the stuff. And when you meet people who are into this or that, and there might be books that they'll bring up, they probably haven't even read it. And that includes, say, Christians. When you talk about like the Bible, most of them have not hardly read even a page. And then from there, you could just imagine, you could figure out how many communists have read Das Kapital, but how many Yockeyites have read Yockey seems to be very slim. And it seems to be just people want a kind of characters that they can shape for their fantasy Eurasian Imperium sort of thing, the NazBol kind of thing. A lot of this are people who will say, oh, Hitler should have struck England like Operation Sea Lion, and instead of attacking the Soviet Union, that was his big mistake. You might have heard that. And that they should have kept the Molotov-Ribbentrop. That, you might have encountered people who are really into these kind of ideas. That this is the fantasy that they, and you can kind of build up. You can see where some of this stuff can go. But the fact is, this isn't really where, frankly, and even things like Otto Strasser, and I could go into that too, but he didn't really have these ideas that his followers, or the Neo Black Front or whatever, that in fact he really didn't. He wrote a lot of books and he didn't really say what these people say. But same goes for Yockey. But I've got some books. We'll go into these. First is this one. So this is going to be like the Willis Carto edition of Imperium. This is a really nice book. And then this one, which is more of a secondary work, and with the Revival P. Oliver stuff. But this is important because it's going to be the rebut that, maybe he started. Oh, I lost my train of thought. But maybe here's kind of his place where maybe a certain kind of neo-Nazi will be not too much into George Lincoln Rockwell, who's very much anti-communist, so he's warning more about, Yockey was more, no, we don't really need to worry about the communists. It's more the evil is coming from the America. Okay. So this is what, so most of the far right is more mobilized against communism. So people, Yockey he was different. He wanted this NazBol, Eurasianism. It's not really the case. And maybe we'll just dive into that right now with this one. And just to start off, there's a whole chapter in here called Russia. And just for starters, I'll just read the very end of this chapter. I'll go further back into it too, but I'm not trying to build to anything. I'm just trying to tell you. So he says, Russia, blah, blah, blah. And now the concluding remarks can be made about Russia, its mission, and its potentialities. So this is the the Russia chapter. It says, Russia is outside the West. Its imperialism is a mere negative of Western unlimited organizatory imperialism. Russia's mission is thus purely destructive as far as the West is concerned. Russia is the bearer of no utopian hopes for the West, and anyone who believes it is a cultural idiot. What? A wise geopolitical thinker? No, a cultural idiot. What? Edgy NazBol? No. He says, Russia is the bearer of no utopian hopes for the West, and anyone who believes it is a cultural idiot. That's just what he says. You don't need to take that for your doctrine or, for his word for it, but that is what he actually says. Russia is internally split. The ruling regime does not represent the true Asiatic religious primitive soul, but is a technological caricature of Petronism, and the possibility is inherent in this relationship that one day this regime will go the way of the Romanov. This split can be used against Russia, just as it tries to use inner revolutionary tactics against its political enemies. Such a tactic was used with success against the Romanov regime in 1917 by the West. By virtue of its physical situation on the border of the West, Russia will and must always remain the enemy of the West, as long as these populations are organized as a political unit. So, his opinion, pretty conclusively, is that Russia is purely destructive, has no utopian hopes. If you believe so, you're an idiot. And it'll always remain an enemy. As long as Russia exists, Russia will be the enemy of the West. Okay? And if I need to tell you, the West is like what Yockey is into. It's... this stuff is mostly like Spengler. His stuff is philosophy. He calls Spengler just the philosopher, and he mostly builds on that. And I have problems with. I've talked about that in the past. I've got an episode on some of Spengler's stuff and how it relates, but this isn't. But Yockey, his big thing is basically Europe. And what he wants is a united Europe. So he says any real European wants a united Europe. He says this, like, I'm not a big fan of people who make just categorical judgments like that all the time, but this is how he writes and speaks. But yeah, this is Russia must remain always an enemy. Okay. And to get further into this, I mean, I remember when I first read this book, I read this a long time ago, and this book was presented like, I thought that this guy was more of like how he, like Lord Haha of the USSR or whatever, or people describe him as some kind of like NazBol who wanted like a Molotov-Ribbentrop alternate reality or something. But it's not. So when I read the book, I was actually kind of confused because it wasn't anything like that. Okay. So I'll just go to the last chapter of the book. So the last chapter is called Imperium, named after the book. And he's just giving the exact solution. So it concludes the whole book, and I'll just read. It says, the spiritual preconditions for the contest have been shown. This entire work has been devoted to setting forth the soul world outlook and single inner imperative which can enter this contest for the liberation of the West. How can the liberated West solve this great task of saving 100 million Western lives? There is only one solution, and it is the nearest one. The agricultural territory of Russia provides the means of preserving the population of the West and the necessary base for world dominion of this civilization, which alone can save the West from the threat of annihilation by the outer forces. It is thus a military solution, and there is no other. Our commercial, industrial, technical monopoly is gone. Our military technical superiority remains, as does our superior willpower, organization, talent, and discipline. The glory days of 1941 and 1942 show what the West can do against the barbarian. He's referring to Russia. The whole book, he refers to Russians as barbarians, the barbarian. Stalin, he calls the leader of the barbarians, and so forth. All right. The glorious days of 1941 and 1942 show what the West can do against the barbarian. However superior his numbers, however superior his numbers. Like Russia, the Western civilization is situated in the northeast quadrant. Against the West, therefore, Russia enjoys none of the military advantages it has against America. The common land frontier enables the West to dispense with its gigantic assemblage of sea power as a prerequisite to the land fight. The West will be able to deploy all of its forces onto the plains where the battle for the future of the West will be fought. This military solution presupposes a liberated and united Western culture. Its precondition is the setting free of the Western soul from the domination of traitors and parasites. I set forth here the two great action tasks of the inner imperative of the West. First, the liquidation of the tyranny of the 19th century ideas. This means the complete cleansing of the Western soul from every form of materialism, from rationalism, equality, social chaos, communism, Bolshevism, liberalism, so on and so forth. And he goes on and on. Second, the solution of the immediate life problem of the West by conquest of the Eastern plains, of a base for the further existence and fulfillment of the world mission of the Western civilization. Okay. So he goes on a bit further. I thought I'd throw in that bit because he does qualify. Like, he's not saying we should just throw in to fight with Russia right now as it is, because he says you won't be able to pull it off because everything, all the corruption, the things that he lists, the things that he rages against are there. Okay. But you can see he's calling for another Operation Barbarossa. This is the Barbarossa 2. He's calling for a united Europe, reinvading Russia, in particular. In particular, you could see that he needs the agricultural territory. He's talking about the Ukraine. So he says, the agricultural territory of Russia provides the means of preserving the population of the West and the necessary base for world dominion of the civilization, which alone can save the West from the threat of annihilation by the outer forces. So that agricultural territory is actually what we're dealing with Ukraine. So, like I said, that land has value. Everyone else has been able to see it. Hitler saw it. Stalin saw it. And, even the U.S. was not dumb about this at the time. If you watch the Frank Capra propaganda film that the U.S. made, like, it's Why We Fight. There is a series of these, but there's one on Russia called, like, The Battle for Russia or The Battle for Moscow or something. But it talks about the Ukraine and why Hitler wanted it, or, But you say it's also why Stalin wanted it, and it's why Putin wants it. It's why maybe we want it. But do we? I don't know if we're that intelligent now. I think maybe some people are, but certainly, others will just, only BlackRock wants it or something. As if... But yeah. But it has value. And this is what Yockey is saying. Europe needs to do two things. First, cleanse out all the, the people who he thinks are trash, all the ideologies that he hate. There needs to be, get everything in order. And then second, there needs to be a war. And this is going to include an invasion of Russia. And you just go more into, as already seen, the present situation in the West imposes upon it not only a struggle for power, a fight to keep from passing into slavery to the barbarian, but also a struggle for the continued biological existence of the population of Europe. So this, and he's saying, for this to happen, you need to take this territory from Russia, from the Soviet Union. So this should put the current war into perspective, at least a little bit. At least you should figure why why Europe, it's not in Europe's best interest if the Russian Federation overruns all this territory and permanently, you know, locks it up for its own empire, you know, for the Eurasian Imperium, for the Dugan, for the Duganist Hinkelite thing. You know, if you're so short-sighted that you can't see, if you're just such an isolationist, you know, you can't see the stuff, or you don't, you know, whatever. But a lot of the people who get into this, you know, are basically, who like to talk about this stuff, are geopolitical, I don't know. They like to, they're into geopolitics or something, but they can't get this stuff. They don't see the value of this kind of territory. But you can see that however many people who, you know, because you'll see the big Russophiles will have like Yockey pictures or call themselves Yockeyites or something. How many times have you seen that? You know, you don't need to raise your hand, but I'm sure you might have seen it. If you're familiar with Yockey, you've probably seen it. So you can get an idea how, if these people have actually read any of this stuff. Okay. So the majority of this book is about America, who and yeah, Yockey cannot stand America, and he presents basically, just to paraphrase, I don't need to dig up all this stuff, but over and over, he'll say Europe, he wants to see Europe as a united entity. That's how he sees this. He sees America as like a Judaized former Western, or it's like a Judaized Western colony. But he sees the real threat. Everything is coming from America. And in his terms, it's because America is European stock. It is Western. It's a Western colony. But what he's saying is that America has all the, for instance, America is ruled by, you know, who he says are the cultural disorders and or cultural parasites. I haven't read this in a while, but I just kind of, you're gonna get the, but Europe, he says, has like an inner America, like the Michael. You know, this inner weakness, he says the Churchills and all that, the inner Churchill, the inner Michael, what Spengler described. Spengler would talk about this. Spengler was more of an actual Russophile. You know, he seemed more into Eurasianism and would say, you know, you purge your inner England and things. But Yockey will say that basically America is more of a threat because it can make inroads with Europeans, because Europeans have inner America in a way, like the weakness, the base, their nature of their hearts. You know, the worst people are going to relate to this, and so there's a connection that makes it dangerous. But he'll say that Russians are not European and are not Western and have no connection at all. And Europeans have no inner Russia, or he says this stuff over and over again. Like, Russia is not part of the West. Russia hates the West. And, but he presents this as, these are the two main foes of Europe, the two outer foes, you know, the two outer enemies, you know, it's America and, Russia. Yockey is American, but he's thinking in terms, he sees himself as a European, a proper European, because he's a pan-European and has a pan-European vision. Okay. Which is stuff that I do agree with, I'll just say. And I like stuff like that. And that's why I entertain these ideas. That's why I've read all of Yockey's books and articles and stuff. And I basically think some of the stuff is correct. I don't, you know, I'm not really into some of his categorical judgments and the negativity as about some things, but in others he's correct. But I'm just saying what he says. You know, you can make up your own opinion on if you like this guy or not, or but even if you don't like him, a lot of the people who pretend to like him, you know, they do it to shoehorn this kind of Russia thing. So you could see just how much of a fraud this whole thing is, and how foolish some of this kind of ideological propaganda is. That is pro Russia. All right, so we'll just go into a little more. You know what? Maybe. Do we really even want to? How much do we want to dig into this? There's a whole chapter on. This is the participation of Russia. There's 2 Russian things talking about Peter. Okay. During the centuries before Peter, there had always been 2 ways of thinking in Russia. The one was feeling in the broad masses of peasants and men of strong interest. The other one was the more intellectual desire to adopt Western forms of thought and action and force them on the Slavic population. The latter was confined to a small stratum, the physical descendants of the Varangians, who had invaded Russia from Scandinavia during Charlemagne's time, and was recruited from time to time with new blood from Sweden and Germany. With this stratum, Peter overcame the old Russian faction and dragged an unwilling Russia into the comedy of Western nations. Never did he succeed, nor did his Romanov dynasty after him, in implanting Western ideas below the surface of the Russian soul. Russia, the true spiritual Russia, is primitive and religious. It detests Western culture, civilization, nations, arts, state forms, ideas, religions, cities, technology. This hatred is natural and organic, for this population lies outside the Western organism, and everything Western is therefore hostile and deadly to the Russian soul. The true Russia is the one which Petronism tried to coerce. It is the Russia of... he just goes on and on from here. He names a bunch of Russian names, like you could... Dostoevsky shows up and some others. It is the Russia of Moscow, the third Rome, the mystical successor to Rome and Byzantium. A fourth there cannot be, wrote the monk Theophilus. This Russia identifies itself with humanity and despises the rotten West. Okay, so we're just reading. Being primitive, Russia's spiritual center of gravity is an instinct, and thus it was that even during the rationalistic, equalitarian 19th century, Russia was a land of pogroms. The Russian felt the complete alienness of the culture, state, nation, church, race of the Jew, and the Tsarist regime marked out a pale of settlement in which alone Jews could reside. The Upper Russia, the westernized stratum, which played with French materialistic philosophy, spoke German and French, traveled to the spas of Europe, and concerned itself with European cabinet politics, was the object of the fierce hatred of the pure Russians, the nihilists, who embodied the wordless idea of complete destruction of the West and the Russification of the world. Whether this great destructive idea was expressed in the religious form of the assertion of the sole truth of Eastern Orthodox Christianity, or of the later political form of Slavophilism and Pan-Slavism, or of the present-day Marxist Bolshevism, it continues to have the same inner imperative of destroying everything Western, which it feels is stifling its Russian soul. So, does this seem like, very, very pro-Russia? Is this seeming like he's trying to come up, we shouldn't be enemies, we should be friends, or like the boomer mindset of the dissident rightoid that never can figure out. These people now, they can't grasp the idea even of an enemy. let alone like an enemy of the West or something. This is what he's writing about. But you talk to these people, and they're just, we shouldn't be, we should be friends. Even people who hate you, but whatever. Okay, the Bolshevik Revolution. Reading more. Okay. The Bolshevik Revolution of November 1917 was a political epic both for Russia and for Europe. The possibility of such a revolution had, of course, always been there, as shown by Pugachev's insurrection during Catherine the Great's reign, by the numerous assassinations in the 19th and 20th centuries, by the huge underworld shown in the writings of Dostoevsky, by the huge secret police and spy network. The actual form of the revolution, when it did occur, was dual. There was a revolt of the primitive Russian soul against the Western Romanov regime and all that it represented. And there was a simultaneous assumption of the leadership of this revolt by the Jewish culture, nation, state, race. The necessary financing was procured in New York from members of the cultural distorting group in America. So this gets into another big theme throughout all his writings, which is that Russia is propped up by enemies of the West, in particular by elements in America who use Russia against the West. And that's his view of World War II, that basically he writes extensively that there's no way that he feels the Soviet Union could have ever won except with America, which is like the, like to him, it's like the perverse, evil, formerly, it's the Western but anti-Western nation that props up Russia as like against, So we'll just go on. The influence of cultural distortion on Russian policy has not been of the same. Okay, the duality of the Bolshevik Revolution meant that the one side of it was a failure, the primitive, Asiatic, instinctive side. The aim of the Russian side of the rising was to sweep away all Western institutions, ideas, forms, and realities. Thus, it wished to extirpate the Western technology and economic forms, as well as other aspects of Westernization of Russia. In this it did not succeed, for the Bolshevist minority did set itself to Western industrialize Russia to the highest possible degree in preparation for a series of wars against hated Europe. During the period 1918-1939, Russian policy was actualized through its international organization, the Comintern, comprising all the communist parties in the Western civilization. The policy of distorting the so on and so forth. I'll read on. And thus there are two Russias, the Bolshevik regime and the true Russia underneath. Bolshevism. So note he will always say Russia isn't really communist in a way. It's not really Marxist. It's not, but he's not saying that it's something good necessarily, because what he's saying is that communism would have been a Western. It's like a Western facade for it that it adopted, and he says it adopted out of stupidity, frankly, because it could have been something else. And again, we still kind of see that playing out. But the actual Russia is not any better. It's not friendly. Like, because they discard communism, they don't become friendly. He says that they've always hated the West, and it was actually he speculated they should have discarded that even before to fight the West. So it's not, liberals can't really see things like that. It should have been just an ideological struggle. Yockey, his views on things like race and things are very much different than really what anyone else on the planet believes. But he still kind of sees, anyway. So, and there are two Russias, the Bolshevik regime and the true Russia underneath. Bolshevism, with its worship of Western technology and of a silly foreign theory of class war, does not express the soul of the true Russia. This broke out in the insurrection of the Streltsy against Peter the Great and of Pugachev against Catherine the Great. In his rebellion, Pugachev and his peasants massacred every officer, official, and nobleman that fell into their hands. Everything having any connection with the West was burned or destroyed. Whole tribes joined in the mass movement. For 3 years, 1772 to 75, it continued, and the Moscow court itself was at one time in danger. When arraigned after his capture, Pugachev explained that it was God's will that he should chastise Russia. This spirit is still there, since it is organic and cannot be killed, but must express itself. This is the spirit of Asiatic Bolshevism, which is at present harnessed to the Bolshevism of the Moscow regime, with its economic technical obsession. This brings us to the part that Bolshevist ideology plays in the present world situation. The equating in the Western civilization of Russia with a class war theory is itself a triumph of Russian propaganda. Theories in politics are techniques. Politics is power activity, not reasoning or arguing or proving. For any Westerner to believe that Russia represents some sort of desire to reform society or economics, along the lines of favoring this class or that class, is to show himself utterly incapable of political thinking. Nor is it any more correct to think that Russia wishes to organize the whole world along the same economico-socio-political lines as present-day Russia. The Russian mission is to destroy the West, and any inner agitation within the West promotes this mission. Class war, race war, social degeneration, crazy art, decadent films, wild theories and philosophies of all kinds serve this vast Russian program. Communism is just one of these, but if another were more effective tomorrow, it will replace it. The ideal of communism as a theoretical program for the reorganization of society does not exist in the world of facts, either in Russia or America. The communism the West has to fear is of two varieties, neither of them in the least bit theoretical. First, class war, and second, the communist organization. First is entirely native. So these are, I mean, what he's saying here is basically is food for thought, and it is basically, I think, largely correct. I can't sign off on all his stuff, but in broad strokes, this is all right. What else we got? Da, 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 da. Okay. And so, and yeah, he does go into, he wrote articles like what's behind the hanging of the Jews in Prague. And so he does note that like Stalin did go on an anti-Semitic kind of turn, and that he's basically saying that Jews weren't as able to be successful permanently in Russia as they were in the U.S. because of various things, particularly their hatred for like the West and things like that. But nevertheless, not good. He does say that he does try to look for ways for that the Cold War can actually serve Europe. Okay. He goes on and on. Russia. Okay. All right. We'll just move on. All right. And then this might be, someone might rebut, you talk about Imperium, but he wrote that after World War II, and he further revised his ideas, and then he says that Russia is good. Except here's the thing, though, that never really happens, because he he continues to maintain that Russia's no good. And what do we got? Maybe here's a chapter we'll just read. Okay, once again, you know what? Maybe I'll. Here's where we kind of get into is Cold War kind of footing, because like I said, he's saying that the real enemy of Europe, and that's where the title of this book comes from. It's funny, but he's saying that Europe is the real enemy, right? But it doesn't mean that Russia is good or something. So we'll just demonstrate. All right. No, hold on. That's where I want to. We'll just start there. Or where can we start? Okay. Because he talks, he thinks on a level that I think most people can't, where, like, you hear really dumb ideas of war and things and politics that Americans have, that they don't get how things need to be put together a certain way, and that like how you would extract concessions for this or that. Where do we want to start? Where do we... Okay, wait. Okay. The following would be the following... You're reading now. The following would be the results of two possible kinds of Russian policy. The far-sighted policy of striving to integrate Europe into an enormous Russian empire, embracing the whole world, and the policy of attempting to rule Europe by terror and violence. Should Russia aim at a lasting incorporation of Europe into its empire, it could succeed only if it granted Europe significant concessions. The first of these would be administrative autonomy for Europe as a unit, for that is the desire of all Europeans. The Michael Stratum and its leaders, the senile Churchills, of course, accepted. So he's saying basically, he's saying what he's saying is that if the Soviet Union were to invade Europe, it can't be that bad, basically, because it's going to play out in two ways. His argument is this is why America is more dangerous, because America already has more influence on Europe and is a bad influence for various reasons, but especially because Europe, he says, has an inner America. But with Russia, it's different. You understand? Okay. Should Russia aim at a lasting incorporation? Okay. Should Russia attempt to terrorize Europe, it would summon forth in the European people the will to counter-terror. Faced with the barbarian, all Europeans, even the simplest-minded liberals, would learn the necessity of inner firmness, of a stern will, the virtues of command and obedience, for these alone could force the barbarian to accept demands, or else to retreat to his tundras and steppes. All Europeans would realize that not parliamentary babble, class war, capitalism, and elections, but only authority, the will to power, and finally, the military spirit could ever drive out the barbarian. The expulsion of England's army of, so on. To conclude, between the two powers of the concert of Bolshevism that dominates the second interbellum period, there are numerous similarities, some profound, some superficial. Okay, all right, we don't need to go into that. And they're what else do we have? So it says, America can only divide Europe no matter what its policy. Okay. Barbarian Russia can only awaken Europe's sterner instincts. The American-Jewish symbiosis composed of fellow Jews and American colonials who are at once primitive and over-civilized appeals to the lower stratum of Europe and to the lowest stratum in every European, the stratum of animal instincts, laziness, cowardice, avarice, dishonor, and ethical individualism. America can only divide Europe no matter what its policy. Russia can only unite Europe no matter what its policy. So what he says is that if the Russia were to invade Europe, it's going to be two ways. Two things are going to happen. He says Russia will be incapable of governing Europeans or enslaving them permanently or anything. And so for their rule to last, they'll have to give Europe its autonomy. They'd have to create basically a united Europe. And basically he says that Russia would quickly be eclipsed. And instead of Russification of Europe, you would see the Europeans just dominate whatever that empire is. And that would be the only policy where Russia could keep Europeans in an empire, as if, Europeans are given autonomy where they can actually grow and eclipse Russia. So he says Russia is no threat in that way, because he says Russians are incapable of ruling Europeans. I know I haven't read all of that, but I can maybe get more to it. But that's still a paraphrase either way. But then he says that, America actually can, because America can appeal to Europeans in ways that Russians can't. But the other thing would be if Russians implemented some terroristic regime, it would kick off like a liberation war of Europeans, that Europeans would be awakened by this Russian threat. So it would make things very real. Not theoretical anymore, but Europeans would have to get their act together and fight a liberation war. So he says either way, this will be good. This would be good for Europe. So if Russia invades Europe, it's good for Europe because Europe has these two paths. But for America, America is more dangerous because America can just keep dividing Europe, is what he's saying. You understand? Of course you do. Okay. What else we got? So, the Russian barbarian does not understand power. He has no knowledge of the meaning of this age. Neither the half-westernized Bolsheviks nor the pure Asiatic masses possess the qualities needed to build an empire. The spiritually unadulterated Russian, whose limitations are binding for the Moscow regime, is religious, hence inward. He is rural and land-hungry, but there is no nobility and no religion in Russia that can attend to his material and spiritual cares. Marxism is a collection of dead and sterile phrases and can no more strongly inspire the Russian than it can the European. Pan-Slav religiosity does not seek an empire. With it, an empire cannot be built. Okay. So Europe recognizes its cultural enemies and its sole political enemy. Thus sees the only path that can follow the base of Europe's politics. If we follow now the faith of our instincts, our intelligence, so whatever. Okay. Okay. Oh yeah, that's like the end of the book. Here, we'll go back. Because there's a chapter we want to get into. Okay. Okay, so if a selected killing should be the method in an attempt to behead the European organism, then Russia would be likewise incapable of that. Okay, this was the method of the American Jewish war crimes program, the most extensive terror in the history of the world. American Jewry attempted to isolate the elite and string up its members one by one, but there too it missed the mark. Russia did not practice any systematic war crimes terror, in spite of encouragement on the part of American Jewry, since it was more interested in individuals as material for the future than in settling past accounts according to Mosaic law. Furthermore, the American so on. American Jewry insists that Russia could overwhelm Europe quite mechanically and automatically. We're not American colonial troops here. Yet the fact remains that only America's intervention in the Second World War prevented Europe from destroying Russia as a political unit. The present Russian power accumulation was thus created by American Jewry. Never in the 5 centuries of Russian history has Russia been able to make way into Europe unless supported by one or more European states. Against Frederick the Great, Russia received aid from France, Austria, and Sweden. Against Napoleon, Russia received aid from England, Austria, Prussia, Sweden, and Spain. In 1945, Russia penetrated into Germany only with America's assistance. Before American intervention, Europe had hurled the barbarian back across the Volga. Russia is a threat only to a divided Europe. A united Europe could destroy the power of the Bolshevik Russia at the moment of its choosing. That Europe has need of America to defend itself against Russia is a crass lie. So he's saying united Europe could easily defeat Russia. Russia is only a threat because America empowers. Only America can grant Russia entry into Europe. This is true in 1945 and will be just as true in 1967 or 1975. This book was written a while ago. There are 2 ways in which America Jewry could deliver Europe to a Russian Bolshevist occupation: by voluntarily making Russia a gift of it, as it did with China in 1947, or by losing a war against Russia from European bases. In any case, Europe, that means here above all, the culture-bearing stratum will choose its own enemy because so on and so forth. So, but here is, what else do you say? So, but I mean, these ideas aren't just without nothing, because keep in mind, Russia is what caused Europe to go far right in the first place, with these people horrified by the Bolshevik terror campaign, and so this, and other things, white Russian emigres and things coming, inspired a lot of what happened after. So this could play out again, even right now, because this war is kind of hot right now. So that's why this is kind of interesting. But all right. What else we got? Neither Russia nor America belongs to the Western civilization. So neither Russia nor America belongs to the Western civilization, though America considered abstractly in and of itself, or he says neither Russia nor America Jewry belongs to the Western civilization, though America considered abstractly in and of itself, as it was before the revolution of 1933, is still a European colonial people. Hence, there is no cultural casus belli in the, So this is the difference. You go forward. Some of the stuff he writes is funny. Feminine matriarchal life is routine, hence American life is routine and technicized. Books instruct the population how to win friends, how social life, family life, sexual life are to be conducted. Yet this uniformization of life is not perceived as burdensome or ignominious. The American population is entirely passive and feels quite at home in this atmosphere of a nursery that's, I don't know. All right. Russian life is fundamentally, just reading on. Russian life is fundamentally barbarian. The barbarian is to be distinguished not only from culture men, but from savages, primitives, fellaheen, and decadents as well. Barbarian is a word full of promise, for the barbarian is inwardly in motion. This is Spengler type stuff. The Germanic tribes that occupied imperial Rome were barbarians. From this Germanic stock came, many centuries later, men who wrought Western culture. The barbarian is the pre-cultural form of humanity, just as different from the end product of a culture, as from the savage, the proto-human type that stands in no relation whatever to a high culture. The barbarian is strong-willed, yet irresolute. He can readily be converted to new doctrines, witness the Russian conversion to Marxism. But the conversion must be superficial, for mere verbiage cannot abolish the difference between cultureman and barbarian. The barbarian is rough and tough, not keen-witted, fuel of artifice, and certainly not legalistic, and he is the opposite. So when he's saying barbarian, like he it's not purely a negative thing, and like he said, it has potential in the Spenglerian formula that this could be an ascendant kind of life form. It could be, but nevertheless, this is an enemy. Okay. So this could be an ascendant enemy, in his view. This isn't really how I don't really agree with this sort of thing that you could look at these barbarians and they're going to become like a great civilization in the future or something. I don't think that necessarily is always going to play out, across certain lines, be they whatever. Okay. But that's his view on it. All right. The orientation towards techniques is common to both America, technical by instinct, Russia. Russia exhibits the same. Okay. In Russia, the craze for uniformity, including education mania, is likewise imposed from above to carry out a political program. The emphasis on the power of environment, the adoration of reflexology, the idolization of machines, of statistics, of percentages, and economic theories generally. All this is in Russia simply technique, as it is all essentially negative. The Russian peasant barbarian soul is a religious ferment, and as such abhors economic theories, machines, science, and nationalism. The program of Moscow Bolshevism represents a means of quashing the hyper-individuality of the people of Pugachevs, Aksiskovs, Kropotkins, Nechiyevs, Dostoevskys, Rasputins, Shopsy. Primarily, Moscow Bolshevism is a method for politicizing the religious barbarian Russia. That the Moscow regime uses Marxism as an export article is simply political idiocy, and the possibility constantly exists that it will one day discard it because of its ineffectiveness. So this is kind of hasn't it? I mean, just for, he's saying it's going to be the same either way. They have, they have Marxism, but he says it's really dumb, and he said that they'll get rid of it sooner or later. They'll discard it. It's ineffective. They're trying to fight Europe. It's only really useful for that, but for Europe, the following distinction is important. American Jewish Bolshevism is the instinctive destruction of the West through primitive, anti-cultural ideas, peace, comfort, security, abolition of individuality, through over-technicization, through the imposition of culture distortion and the culture retardation. Russian Bolshevism seeks to attain the destruction of the West in the spirit of pan-Slavic religiosity i.e., the Russification of all humanity. Okay. So, Russian Bolshevism is simply barbarism, and therefore, so he says that basically the American Bolshevism, he says it poses a real spiritual threat to Europe in every aspect. It strikes a weak spot in the European organism. Even in Europe, there exists a certain stratum, the microstratum, the inner America, which is animated by the purely animal American ideal of peace, comfort, security, abolition of individuality. Even in Europe, there is an element that would like to replace culture with machinery. Even on Europe, culture-retarding regimes can be imposed. It is necessary, if necessary, with American bayonets. Even if Europe cultural distortion is present. So, in the Cato type exists. You can watch him babbling misty-eyed about democratic ideals while the barbarian and the distorter occupy the sacred soils of the West. The 20th century European Cato would rather see the West destroyed than have finally to toss the rubbish of democratic ideals on the scrap heap of history, where the corpse of democracy lies stinking in the putrescent after a half-century of decay. Okay, so that's why America is more of a threat, because it strikes a chord with Europeans. Okay, reading on. Russian Bolshevism is simply barbarism, and therefore finds no resonance anywhere in America. Russian Bolshevism is simply barbarism, and therefore finds no resonance anywhere in Europe. Even Europe's lowest spiritual stratum, the inner trader, the microstratum, has nothing whatever in common with the pan-Slavism of barbaric population streams. Russian religiosity has been temporarily, and from a cultural standpoint, falsely raised to political intensity as a reflex of the great Western spiritual development, the resurgence of authority, the genesis of the imperium idea. Without the Western culture, there would be no structure as Russia, only marauding tribes of barbaric horsemen like the Cossacks and Taras Bulba. Russian Bolshevism is therefore less dangerous to Europe than American Jewish Bolshevism, for no aspect of its menace corresponds to a weakness in Europe's spiritual armor. Europe actually has an inner America, the microstratum. However, Europe has no inner Russia. Obviously, the so-called communist parties are not at all the reliable tools wherewith the Russian occupation of Europe could be built. In fact, the work of these communist parties is already done. They are useful instruments of early Bolshevism foreign policy, especially in the period of so on and so forth. The communist parties of the West are simply class war units, not bearers of so on and so forth. Okay, the effect that a Russian occupation of Europe would have on the Western culture is not equally well known and can be determined only by uncovering its organic basis. The Russian is a barbarian, the European is a culture man in his late civilization phase. Before this moment in history, barbarians have violently invaded culture areas. In 16th century BC, northern barbarians invaded the Egyptian culture Petrifact to enact the chapter of history that is called the Hyksos area. The belief that a Russian barbarian occupation of the whole Europe would be similar to the Russian occupation of half-century of Germany after the Second World War is a completely false estimate of the possibilities. A Russian occupation of Europe would involve an entirely different distribution of forces and completely different psychological situation. In the first place, the Russian occupation after the Second World War originated as a gift from America. Cynically, Europe's border against Asia, which had been pushed back gradually over a millennium, was restored to its place of 900 years ago. Thus, the history, honor, and traditions of 30 generations of Europe were outraged. The atrocities committed during the first years of the Russian occupation were permitted, encouraged, and even imitated by America. Without American encouragement, Russia would not have been in the position to commit its atrocities. In the second place, Europe was not politically able to intervene to protect 30 million Europeans, for every European country was governed by the Churchill regimes the Americans had appointed. And these puppet governments greeted barbarian Russia as their valiant ally, while their members exchanged decorations with those of the Moscow regime. Russia's occupation of a small part of Europe and its domination over 1/10 of the European population after the Second World War were made possible only by the Washington regime, which in 1945 wanted Europe so divided that the red flag would wave over Berlin and Vienna. If the Washington regime, instead of giving Russia simply a small part of Europe, had abandoned to it all of Europe, and that is a possibility contained in the events to come, the division of forces would be completely different. Instead of America Jewry, the whole of Russia, Eastern Europe, and most of Western Europe under Churchill regimes ranged against part of Germany, then against 200 million Russians, would be arrayed against the total body of the West, 250 million men who are superior to them in intelligence, technical skill, organizational talent, and will to power. If this happens, America will be expelled from Europe once and for all. Europe will have but a single enemy. That would be, a unifying factor such as did not exist from the First Crusade until Lepanto. A Russian occupation would develop along one or two lines. The first possibility is an endless series of European uprisings against Europe, or an endless series of European uprisings against Russia that could result only in the expulsion of the demoralized barbarians. The second possibility would result from Russians introducing a clever regime and according Europe extensive autonomy and magnanimous treatment. Within a few decades, this Russia would naturally aim at infiltrating, or within a few decades, this Europe would naturally aim at infiltrating horizontally the whole Russian seat of origin, its technical, economic, social, and finally military and political life. Instead of the Russification of Europe, as Dostoevsky and Askakov dreamed of it, would result the Europeanization of Russia once again, and this time in far stronger degree. This would occur from pure historical necessity, since this is the age of absolute politics, and Europe is politically shrewd, whereas barbarian Russia is formless and politically inept, fluctuating between senseless vehemence and inner doubt. Not even the most brilliant statesman in Russia could use this barbarian material to subjugate Europe in its imperialist stage of its destiny. An attempt by Russia to integrate Europe into its power accumulation peacefully would eventually result in the rise of a new symbiosis, Europe-Russia. Its final form would be the European Imperium, would be that of a European Imperium. An attempt by Russia to chastise and terrorize Europe without the help of America would result in Russia's expulsion from Europe for good, by a Europe whose own dormant barbarian instincts have been thus reawakened. So, if Russia should occupy Europe and attempt to imitate the American policy of encouraging petty statism to divide and conquer, it would fail utterly. America has been successful in that policy only because of its access to the European Michael stratum with its lick-spittled Churchills. The Michael yearns for American capitalism and liberalism, but trembles with abysmal cowardice before Russian barbarism. The communist parties would be of slight use to Russia in any attempt to set up puppet governments on the model of America's Churchill regimes. The leadership and membership of these communist parties is composed of inferior European types, not of pan-Slavs or religious Russian nationalists. The barbarian, immature, and unversed in subtleties in the art of politics, trusts only those who are of his own religion, and the true religion of the Russian is not Marxism, but Russia. The first victims of a Russian occupation of Europe would be the European communists, who would be liquidated at the slightest suspicion of disloyalty. Their communism stems from books, their pro-Russian sentiments from hatred and envy of the European surroundings. Their utopian orthodoxy about Russia comes from a lack of realism and an exaggerated intellectualism. The Russian knot and the Russian revolver would soon teach them that what they have not learned from their books. would shatter their utopian ideals and give their hatred a new focus. So this could be applied to a lot of the dissidents of now. You know, these aren't a lot of these types, these pro-Russia Russophile types. You know, they're maybe not. You know, they're not calling those Marxists, or maybe they do. You know, because some of them do, like Hinkle. But it's saying these are the worst people. You know, these are inferior people who, you know, they come up with these weird utopian ideas and they just put it on Russia, but it's they don't really know anything about anything, and that, you know, Russians would just blow them away without a second thought, or just hang these people very quickly if it came to it, you know. Russia's effect on petty statism and petty nationalism would in no way resemble America's successful perpetuation of these cultural pathological phenomena. So America does all this petty state. He blames us all on, but he says, you know, Russians can't do this. The fact that Russia used the fiction of independent states and, you know, so, okay. I don't know. I think that should, I mean, we could dive further into this, but I think that kind of demonstrates that you might have heard people say that this Yockey guy was real into Russia. He wanted a alliance with the Soviet Union, but it's different than what he didn't want any kind of alliance, except one where Russia would just be completely eclipsed because they're incapable of governing Europeans, is what he said. You know, he says that if Russia invades, it's okay, but it's because we're either going to overthrow them and toss them out, a united Europe will get rid of them, or they're not going to be able to tell us what to do anyway, so it'll just be they'll remove everyone else, and then we'll do our own thing. This is what he's saying. I mean, he doesn't give any kind of promise to Russia. He says there is no promise. Russia is only destructive, you know. The real Russia, he says, is not any kind of European facade put over Russia like it has been in the past, like it has been Peter the Great or Lenin or anyone. But the real Russia is something else, and it is our enemy. They do hate us. You know, yeah, he is saying it's more to, you know, he says that evil elements in the West are more to blame, but also keep in mind these are backing Russia. And it's the same stuff now, because Russia now is still supported by the West and still, you know, kept alive by the West. And, you know, the Biden regime, we'll say, you know, they don't have any interest in even winning this war with Russia. They're leaving Russia right where they are and really letting them further in. So, I don't know. You see how, like, it could easily be stopped. We know now that the Russian military is garbage. We see how those soldiers fight. They fight like garbage. If you can't see that, you know, it's because you're garbage. It's because you are an idiot. It's because you can't fight. You are not like that much of a man. You're an idiot. If you think that the Russian army is fighting well, you're a piece of trash. You don't know what you're talking about. You, as a man, had a responsibility to learn more about weapons and arms and things, and you failed. And you disgust me. No, you don't need to be in the military to learn a little bit about this stuff, or to get serious about warfare and weapons and I don't know what's wrong with some people who they I don't know, they have no clue. But you need to have a clue. I don't give anyone an excuse for not having a clue. And there have been people who I've hung out with who basically expressed that they didn't feel like, I don't like, it's not like I hang out with like veterans or something, or like combat vets or something, but like when people say like they wouldn't actually like have it in them, like fight in a war, like as a man, I won't hang out with you ever again. I mean, like, because you should there should at least be a potential that you would fight as a man, you know. Or else, what, like, to me, it's like, what are we doing? Like, I'm like, whatever, you go do your thing, but that's not really what I'm about personally. So, if you get my drift, but the people who are real into Russia like that, it's okay. Okay, we still have people coming over late in the game, but okay. But either way, I just thought that might be different than what you've heard on Yockey if you're familiar with him. I think you could probably see that a lot of these people haven't read these books, you know. And there's other stuff I could have gone into. I've got other stuff too. This isn't like a great book or anything. It's kind of like a scatterbrain thing, but it goes into a lot of the people around him, and kind of it shows kind of like a scummy scene, really. But people who, you know, how deep this guy Yockey was into some of the stuff, and in terms of just like international, I don't know, his escapades with different contacts or whatever, and what they were trying to do with some of these ideas. But this is the basis of the idea. I mean, he basically says that the Russians are complete trash, you know, and they're our enemy. They hate us. They hate our guns, and all there is between us is war. He calls for Operation Barbarossa 2. He doesn't call for Molotov-Ribbentrop 2 or something. He calls for Operation Barbarossa 2. You know, he says that war with Russia can awaken Europe, will awaken the real Europeans. And as much as Yockey is wrong, and like I said, I don't agree with this kind of Spengler kind of philosophy. I think a lot of the ideas are goofy, but I do think the pan-European idea is correct. I think it's definitely correct to fight Russia. I think in Ukraine, and maybe we'll talk about this further, we'll get into the limits of nationalism. And this could be applied to other things going on too. Palestine, obviously, where nationalism is getting them nowhere, you know, and they've had to rely on other, the pan-Arabism or Islamism or Caliphate to come along or something, because they're not going to pull this off. But same thing with Ukraine. You know, there a kind of pan-Europeanism is necessary. The real Europeans are gonna have to come out for this one, and that's going to be the real fight. And Russia is an enemy, so I mean, people who try to miscast Russia as something it's not, they're not our friends because they're lying to us. I'm not cool with that. If you lie to me, I'm not really cool with it, and that's why I don't like Russia, because they just lie so much. They don't have an honest word to say. Where I don't know. We don't need to go too into it. I think you kind of get the gist of it, and but I think I'll end it there. But yeah, thanks for tuning in.